So you tell me to tell you something that maybe a dozen people actually know.
How can this be? This doctor coming out, basically blowing it all out of the water is incredible.
Maybe a dozen people actually know. That's going to come out very soon. Okay. Meghan Markle, the reason why you watch her interviews and she just seems off, she's owned by a pharmaceutical company. The 2 children that she had, they're not hers. She didn't have them with Harry. And how her and Harry met is that she's a prostitute.
That Meghan had a hysterectomy and couldn't have children. And that was a big issue in their relationship. So that says a lot to the fake royal kids right now, because obviously they couldn't have come out of her. So that's something that she obviously is going to.
There are rumors people repeat casually, and then there are claims that are only spoken in closed rooms, behind lowered voices, with the assumption they will never reach daylight. This story begins with the second kind, not because it has been proven, but because it has been whispered for so long that its persistence alone has drawn attention. According to accounts circulating among insiders, a medical professional allegedly made statements that challenge one of the most public narratives of the modern royal era. The allegation itself is not subtle, nor is it minor. It questions whether Meghan Markle ever carried or delivered either of her 2 children. These claims are presented not as online gossip, but as professional assertions attributed to someone trained to understand medical responsibility, confidentiality, and legal consequence. What makes the allegation notable, according to those who repeat it, is not just its content, but what allegedly followed. There was no visible legal response, no formal denial tied to medical documentation, no public correction issued through official channels. Instead, there was silence. And in highly managed public narratives, silence is rarely accidental. It becomes, fairly or unfairly, a point of tension. This is where the discussion shifts away from celebrity behavior and towards something more structural. Once medical claims enter public conversation, even indirectly, they invite scrutiny, not of personality, but of process. Pregnancy and childbirth are not abstract experiences. They are physical, documented, and typically accompanied by countless small details that surface naturally when people recount them. Observers note that Meghan Markle is widely known for speaking openly about emotional experiences, personal challenges, and intimate life events. Interviews, podcasts, and public appearances often include detailed reflections on feelings, relationships, and moments of hardship. Yet when the subject turns to pregnancy and childbirth, the narrative reportedly becomes far more restrained. There are no vivid recollections of labor, no casual references to physical recovery, no spontaneous anecdotes about the bodily changes that typically accompany pregnancy. On its own, this absence proves nothing. People are entitled to privacy, but critics argue that when combined with other inconsistencies, the quiet becomes noticeable. The story then moves from tone to logistics. Hospitals operate under strict protocols, particularly when dealing with high-profile patients. According to the publicly available accounts, Meghan's first birth was described as medically complex, involving significant pain management. Yet the timeline that followed raised eyebrows among those familiar with standard medical practice. Accounts suggested a rapid departure from the hospital shortly after delivery, with no extended observation period described. For those familiar with obstetric procedures, especially when epidurals are involved, this timeline appeared unusual. Hospitals tend to err on the side of caution, documenting everything meticulously, particularly when public scrutiny is guaranteed. Skeptics argue that for the official version to be accurate, multiple safeguards would have had to be bypassed. While not impossible, they claim it would be highly irregular. This is the point where curiosity hardens into doubt, not because of one anomaly, but because anomalies begin to stack. Attention then turns to documentation rather than memory. One photograph widely associated with the early days of Archie's life becomes central to this discussion. According to those analyzing the image, embedded data allegedly places the photo's creation just days after the reported birth date, despite public statements that the event occurred months later. Metadata does not interpret context or intention, it simply records when a file is created. If accurate, this discrepancy would not represent a minor mistake, but a direct contradiction between recorded data and public narrative. Critics argue that dates do not carry emotional bias, they either align or they do not. From there, focus widens to the institutions surrounding the birth. Royal births are not casual affairs. They involve coordination between medical staff, royal households, communications teams, and legal authorities. Public announcements are typically prepared well in advance, timed precisely, and released with deliberate care. Yet in this case, official communications suggested labor was underway after the child had already been born. To skeptics, this implied that even those tasked with managing the process may not have had full visibility. Whether this was confusion, miscommunication, or deliberate compartmentalization remains an open question. At this stage, the discussion becomes less about personal motives and more about information flow. When systems built on precision appear uncertain, observers naturally ask why. Each inconsistency alone might be explained away. Together, they begin to suggest a pattern of fragmentation rather than clarity. The narrative then introduces a far more serious claim, attributed to unnamed family sources, that Meghan Markle allegedly underwent a hysterectomy earlier in life. This allegation is presented as a decisive point, not because it has been verified, but because of its biological implications. A hysterectomy would make pregnancy impossible. There is no middle ground with such a claim. Either it is entirely false, or it fundamentally alters the understanding of subsequent events. Critics argue that the absence of a clear, documented rebuttal only amplifies speculation, though absence of evidence is not evidence itself. By the time attention turns to the birth of the second child, the landscape has already changed. Observers are no longer casually curious, they are actively comparing dates, statements, and sequences. According to critics, the timeline surrounding Lilibet's birth introduces even more uncertainty than the first. Public remarks suggest Meghan Markle may have been pregnant before the couple relocated from the United Kingdom. Later statements reference a miscarriage, followed by claims that the second child was delivered after passing the due date. Each assertion, viewed in isolation, could be reasonable. Combined, they form a timeline that some find difficult to reconcile. Pregnancy is measured in weeks for a reason. Medical professionals track it precisely. Skeptics argue that when accounts overlap in ways that strain the calendar, questions naturally arise. The issue is not emotion, but arithmetic. Dates either align or they do not. What further complicates matters are the differing personal accounts offered by Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. In his memoir, Harry describes specific hospital scenes and moments tied to childbirth. According to critics, these descriptions do not fully align with previous public narratives. Two people present for the same event may remember different details, but the structure of the event should remain consistent. When accounts appear incompatible rather than complementary, credibility erodes quietly, not through outrage, but through friction. At this stage, the discussion turns toward explanations that had previously remained unspoken. Surrogacy and adoption are introduced not as accusations, but as possibilities that could logically resolve inconsistencies. In many contexts, these paths are openly acknowledged and celebrated. The question raised here is not why such methods might be used, but why, if they were never clearly stated. In institutions built on lineage and documentation, transparency is not optional. Critics argue that ambiguity surrounding succession carries legal and constitutional implications far beyond personal reputation. If alternative methods were used, silence becomes the issue rather than the method itself. The absence of definitive clarification fuels continued speculation. There are no lawsuits challenging these narratives, no official release of comprehensive medical documentation, no coordinated effort to put the questions to rest. Instead, there is distance, time, and an apparent reliance on public fatigue. Yet unresolved stories do not vanish, they linger. They resurface when new information emerges, or when old details are revisited through a sharper lens. Each new inconsistency, however small, gains weight because it joins a growing collection. Importantly, this narrative does not conclude with a verdict. It does not claim proof. It presents a sequence of claims, silences, and contradictions that, taken together, have created a durable question mark. The power of the story lies not in what it proves, but in what it refuses to settle. In the end, this is not merely a story about one woman, one marriage, or even one family. It is about what happens when public narratives rely on opacity in systems designed for verification. When silence replaces clarity, speculation fills the gap. For now, the story does not end. It pauses, waiting for documentation, confirmation, or contradiction, waiting for a moment when questions are addressed directly rather than allowed to echo unanswered. And until that moment arrives, the narrative remains suspended, unfinished, unresolved, and impossible for some to ignore.